What happens when a hidden affair explodes in the sterile halls of a hospital? Imagine a pregnant wife, vulnerable and hopeful, suddenly ambushed by her husband's ruthless mistress. The attack is brutal, but the aftermath is even more shocking. When her billionaire father, the formidable Richard Worthington, learns of his daughter's plight, he unleashes a methodical revenge that will bring the entire city to its knees. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a saga of a father's love, a wife's incredible resilience, and a reckoning that will leave you breathless. Olivia Worthington Hayes traced the gentle curve of her belly, a serene smile playing on her lips. The rhythmic, reassuring beep of the fetal heart monitor was the only music she needed. At 8 months pregnant, every flutter and kick from within was a promise of the future she and her husband, William Hayes, had so carefully planned. The private suite at New York's prestigious Lenox Hill Hospital felt more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility, a gilded cage Richard Worthington had insisted upon for his only daughter's final weeks of pregnancy. He'd cited a minor complication, a slight dip in blood pressure, as reason for the extended observation. But Olivia knew the truth. Her father, a man who controlled a global financial empire with an iron will, operated on a single, unwavering principle: proactive, overwhelming force against any potential threat. And to him, the fragility of his daughter and unborn grandchild was the greatest threat of all. She glanced at the crystal vase overflowing with white peonies on the bedside table, a daily delivery from William. He was a good husband, attentive and charming, the perfect complement to her quieter nature. He was the CEO of a rapidly ascending tech startup, a company her father's venture capital firm had generously funded. Theirs was a match celebrated in the society pages, the union of old money and new ambition. William was handsome, driven, and publicly adored her. Yet, in the quiet moments, a shadow of unease sometimes flickered in her heart. A late-night meeting that stretched till dawn, a scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging faintly to his suit jacket, a name, Chloe, muttered in his sleep once, which he'd brushed off as a character from a show. Olivia had chosen to believe him. Trust was the foundation of their life, a life that was about to become infinitely richer with the arrival of their son. The door swished open, and William entered, his face a mask of concerned affection. "How are my two favorite people in the world?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. He leaned down to kiss her, his lips cool against her forehead. "We're fine, Will. The doctor said my pressure is perfectly stable. We could probably go home." "And let your father have a conniption? Not a chance," he chuckled, pulling up a chair. "He'd have his security team drag us back here. You know how he is. Besides, it's better to be safe." He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "I hate that I have this investor dinner tonight. I tried to get out of it." Olivia squeezed his hand. "It's okay. It's important. Go. We'll be right here when you get back." She saw the relief in his eyes. A little too quick, a little too bright. It was another one of those fleeting moments she chose to ignore. The alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. For months, she had built a fortress of denial around her heart, brick by painful brick. She saw the signs, the second phone he kept in his briefcase, the hushed conversations that ended the moment she entered a room, the growing emotional distance he masked with extravagant gifts. But admitting the truth meant admitting her perfect life was a lie, a beautifully constructed facade on the verge of collapse. The baby was her anchor, the reason to hold on, to believe that William would eventually find his way back to her, that the family they were creating would be enough to mend the cracks. "I'll have my phone on me the entire time," he promised. "If anything happens, anything at all, I'll be here in minutes." "Nothing is going to happen," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "It's just quiet in here. It gives me too much time to think." William's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, Don't think too much. Just focus on resting and growing our little champion." He stood, straightening his tie. He looked impeccable in his Tom Ford suit, every inch the self-made titan the magazines proclaimed him to be. "I'll check in before I go into the dinner. I love you, Olivia." "I love you too," she whispered as he walked out, the door sighing shut behind him. The silence he left in his wake was heavier this time. Olivia picked up a silver-framed photo from her nightstand. It was from their wedding day 2 years ago, both of them beaming, captured in a moment of what she had believed was pure, unadulterated joy. Had the lies already begun then? Was the woman who called herself Chloe already a presence in their lives, a ghost at their feast? She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the door open again. She assumed it was a nurse coming for a routine check. "Can I help you?" Olivia asked, not looking up from the photograph. "I think the question is, can I help you?" The voice was sharp, laced with a venom that made the hairs on Olivia's arms stand on end. Olivia's head snapped up. Standing in the doorway was a woman she had never seen before, yet felt she knew intimately. She was stunning in a way that was both intimidating and cheap. A fire engine red dress clung to a surgically perfected figure. Her raven hair was a sleek sheet down her back, and her makeup was a warrior's mask, bold, defiant, and predatory. In her hand, she clutched a designer handbag like a weapon. This had to be her. The ghost. Chloe. "Who are you?" Olivia asked, her heart beginning to pound against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady rhythm of the monitor. The woman smirked, a cruel, knowing twist of her crimson lips. She sauntered into the room, the click of her stiletto heels echoing on the polished floor like gunshots. "Oh, darling, don't play dumb. It doesn't suit you." She stopped at the foot of the bed, her cold eyes raking over Olivia, lingering with theatrical disgust on her swollen belly. "My name is Chloe Reed, and your husband William sent me here. He said it was time you and I finally had a little chat." The name, spoken aloud in the sterile quiet of the hospital room, was a physical blow. Chloe Reed. It was real, the whispers in her heart, the doubts she had so violently suppressed, coalesced into a monstrous certainty. Olivia felt the blood drain from her face, the fortress of her denial crumbling to dust. "William sent you?" Olivia's voice was a fragile whisper, disbelief warring with the cold horror dawning in her eyes. It couldn't be true. Will, for all his flaws, wouldn't do this. Not now. Not here. Chloe laughed, a harsh, grating sound that filled the luxurious suite. "Of course he did. He's tired of this pathetic charade. Tired of playing the doting husband to Richard Worthington's precious, fragile little princess." She paced before the bed, her movements fluid and predatory, like a shark circling its prey. "He wants a real woman, Olivia. Someone with fire, with ambition. Not a pampered incubator." The insult, so crude and vicious, struck Olivia with the force of a slap. A protective instinct, primal and fierce, surged through her. She placed a hand over her belly, shielding her son from the venom spewing from this woman's mouth. "Get out," Olivia said, her voice gaining a sliver of the strength she didn't know she possessed. "Get out of my room right now. Or what? You'll call your daddy?" Chloe sneered, her eyes glittering with malice. "Your father can't protect you from the truth. William loves me. He's been with me for 3 years, long before he slipped that ring on your finger." "This baby," she gestured dismissively toward Olivia's abdomen, "was just a business transaction, a way to secure his position, to get deeper into your father's pockets. But now? Now you're just a liability." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, poisoning the memories Olivia held dear. Their wedding, their shared dreams, the moment they found out she was pregnant. Had it all been a lie? A calculated performance for an audience of one. Her father? Nausea churned in her stomach, hot and acidic. "You're lying!" Olivia choked out, tears welling in her eyes. "Will loves me. He wouldn't—" "Wouldn't he?" Chloe's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper as she leaned closer, her expensive perfume a cloying, suffocating cloud. "He's with me every Tuesday and Thursday night. He tells me how boring you are, how you have no passion. He tells me about your father's business deals. We have our own plans, William and I, and you and that thing inside you are getting in the way." The casual cruelty of her words, the utter disregard for the life Olivia was carrying, shattered the last of Olivia's composure. The beep of the heart monitor seemed to grow louder, faster, a frantic echo of her own terror. This wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a threat to her child. "I'm calling security," Olivia said, her hand trembling as she reached for the call button on the bedside remote. In a flash, Chloe lunged, her manicured fingers clamping down on Olivia's wrist like a vice. The remote clattered to the floor. "No, you're going to listen to me." Her face was inches from Olivia's, her eyes burning with a terrifying, unhinged light. The mask of cool confidence had slipped, revealing a desperate, dangerous woman beneath. "He was supposed to leave you after the baby was born. That was the deal. But he's getting weak, sentimental, talking about responsibility. I won't let you ruin my life." Panic, cold and absolute, seized Olivia. She was trapped, vulnerable. She tried to pull her arm back, but Chloe's grip was shockingly strong. "Let go of me! You think you can just have everything, don't you?" Chloe hissed, her voice cracking with a frantic energy. "The name, the money, the perfect life! You didn't earn any of it! I clawed my way up from nothing! He was my ticket and you stole him!" With her free hand, Chloe swept the crystal vase of peonies off the bedside table. It shattered against the floor, water and delicate white petals spraying across the room. The crash was deafening. Then, she grabbed the silver-framed wedding photo. She stared at it for a moment, her lips curling into a snarl of pure hatred. "This is a lie!" she screamed and hurled it against the wall. The glass exploded, showering the floor with glittering shards. Olivia flinched, a sob catching in her throat. She struggled harder, twisting her body away, trying to protect her stomach. The sudden movement and the intense stress sent a sharp, agonizing pain ripping through her lower abdomen. She cried out, a sound of pure agony. The heart monitor, which had been beeping frantically, suddenly let out a long, piercing, continuous wail. The comforting rhythm was gone, replaced by a flat line of electronic dread. Chloe's eyes widened, first in shock, then in a dawning, manic triumph. The sound seemed to spur her on, pushing her over the edge. "See? Even it knows you're not meant to be a mother." Ignoring the alarm, ignoring Olivia's cry of pain, Chloe scrambled onto the bed. Her knees dug into the mattress on either side of Olivia's legs. She was a fury, her face contorted in a mask of rage. She raised her hands, her long, sharp nails glinting like claws under the hospital lights. "I'll get rid of the problem for him," she shrieked. And then she lunged, her hands aiming straight for Olivia's pregnant belly. The world narrowed to a tunnel of blinding pain and terror. Olivia's scream was swallowed by the blare of the flatlining monitor. She twisted, a desperate, clumsy attempt to shield her womb, her hands flying up to block the attack. Chloe's nails raked across her arms, leaving fiery trails of pain, but Olivia barely felt it. All she could think about was the precious, fragile life within her. Suddenly, the door to the suite burst open. Two nurses, drawn by the alarms, froze in the doorway, their faces masks of horror. The scene before them was one of primal violence, a hysterical woman in a scarlet dress attacking a pregnant patient in her bed, surrounded by shattered glass and flowers. Code Gray, Suite 702! One nurse yelled into her walkie-talkie, her voice trembling but clear. The shout, the sudden presence of others, seemed to break Chloe's frenzied state. She looked up, her wild eyes meeting the shocked gazes of the nurses. For a split second, a flicker of fear crossed her face. Then, with a snarl, she pushed herself off Olivia and scrambled off the bed. She didn't run. She straightened her dress, smoothed her hair, and with a final hateful glare at Olivia, she strode out of the room, pushing past the nurses as if they were nothing more than inconvenient statues. Her chilling composure was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. The moment Chloe was gone, the room swarmed with people. Doctors, nurses, security guards. A calm, authoritative voice cut through the chaos. "Get her on her left side. Page OBGYN stat. We have a placental abruption, possible fetal distress." Hands were on Olivia, gentle but firm, rolling her, checking her vitals. The sharp pain in her abdomen was now a constant, brutal clenching. She could feel a warm wetness spreading beneath her. Tears streamed down her face, silent and hot. She couldn't speak, couldn't form words. The only thought that screamed through her mind was a desperate prayer. "My baby. Please, save my baby." An oxygen mask was placed over her face, and her bed was suddenly in motion, wheels rattling as they rushed her down the hall toward the operating room. The last thing she saw before the darkness of anesthesia claimed her was the shattered picture of her wedding day, her smiling face a mockery of the life that had just been torn apart. Richard Worthington arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later. He moved not like a man, but like a force of nature, a storm front of power and fury contained within a bespoke Brioni suit. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his face a chiseled, unreadable mask. But his eyes, the color of a winter sky, burned with a cold, terrifying fire. His personal security team, all former Mossad agents, cleared a path through the hospital corridors, their presence alone silencing the usual hustle and bustle. He found the waiting room outside the surgical wing in a state of controlled chaos. A hospital administrator was attempting to speak to a pale, shaken William Hayes, who had apparently arrived just moments after Olivia had been taken to surgery. "Mr. Worthington," the administrator began, his voice fawning and nervous. "I am so terribly sorry. We have the woman in custody. Security apprehended her before she could leave the building. We are fully cooperating with the NYPD." Richard held up a single, impeccably manicured hand. The administrator fell silent instantly. Richard's gaze was fixed on his son-in-law. William looked utterly undone. His tie was askew, his face ashen, and he was trembling. "William," Richard's voice was unnervingly calm, a low rumble that promised destruction. "Explain." "Richard, I swear I don't know how this happened," William stammered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Chloe, she's unstable. I was breaking things off with her. She must have snapped. I never, ever would have wanted her to come here. I would never hurt Olivia." Richard stepped closer, invading William's personal space. William visibly flinched. Richard was not a large man, but his presence seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You brought this viper into my daughter's life," he said, each word a perfectly enunciated shard of ice. "You stood in a church and made a vow to protect her, and instead, you invited a predator into her home, into her life, and now into this hospital room where she lay helpless, carrying your son, my grandson." The emphasis on the last two words made William recoil as if struck. "It was a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable mistake. I love Olivia." "Love?" Richard let out a short, sharp sound that was devoid of humor. It was the sound of a predator baring its teeth. "You don't know the meaning of the word. You know only ambition and selfishness. You saw my daughter as a stepping stone. You saw my grandson as leverage." He paused, his cold eyes boring into William's. "You have made a grave miscalculation. Just then, a surgeon in blue scrubs pushed through the doors. His face was grim. "Mr. Worthington?" Richard turned, his entire focus shifting to the doctor. "My daughter? Olivia is stable," the surgeon said, and Richard allowed a single, imperceptible breath of relief. "She lost a lot of blood, but she's strong. We were able to control the bleeding. She's in recovery now." A heavy silence hung in the air. Richard's jaw was clenched so tight a muscle pulsed. He didn't need to ask the next question. The surgeon's eyes told him everything. "And my grandson?" Richard's voice was a raw whisper. The surgeon looked down, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and pity. "The abruption was severe. There was too much trauma, too much time without oxygen. I'm so sorry. We did everything we could. We lost him." The words fell into the silence like stones into a deep, dark well. William let out a strangled sob and collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. Richard Worthington did not cry. He did not shout. He simply stood there, his back ramrod straight. But something in the room changed. The temperature seemed to drop. The cold fire in his eyes solidified into something harder, something absolute and eternal, like glacial ice. He looked from the defeated surgeon to his weeping, pathetic son-in-law, and then at the closed doors behind which his daughter lay, broken and grieving. He took out his phone and made a single call. "Michael," he said to his head of security, "I want to know everything about a woman named Chloe Reed. I want her family, her friends, her finances, her business associates, her dreams, and her nightmares. I want to know where she bought the dress she wore today and who did her hair. I want every skeleton in her closet exhumed and polished, and I want the same for William Hayes." He listened for a moment. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care what laws need to be bent. This is not about the police. This is not about justice." He looked over at William, his face a mask of utter contempt. "This is about retribution. They took my grandson. I'm going to take their whole world." He hung up. It was not a threat. It was an oath. The penthouse office of Worthington Global commanded a view of Central Park that was, in itself, a declaration of power. From 50 stories up, the sprawling metropolis looked like a scale model, its intricate systems of commerce and life laid bare, ready to be manipulated. This was Richard Worthington's domain. For the next 48 hours, he did not sleep. He did not eat. He consumed black coffee and information, fueling a cold, calculated rage that grew more potent with every passing minute. His head of security, Michael Corrigan, a lean, graying man with the quiet intensity of a coiled snake, worked with silent, brutal efficiency. A team of the world's best investigators, hackers, and forensic accountants were mobilized, a private army of shadows Worthington kept on retainer for just such occasions. They descended upon the digital and physical lives of Chloe Reed and William Hayes like locusts, stripping away every layer of privacy, every carefully constructed lie. The preliminary report on Chloe Reed came first. It painted a portrait of desperate, grasping ambition. Born in a forgotten Rust Belt town, she had reinvented herself multiple times, shedding her past like a snakeskin. There were name changes, dubious business college degrees, a string of wealthy older men, and a mountain of debt hidden behind a facade of luxury. She was a board member at a small, trendy marketing firm, a position William had helped her secure. The firm, Vivid Edge Marketing, had recently landed a massive, inexplicable contract with a subsidiary of Hayes' tech company, Innovate Dynamics. It was a clear kickback scheme, sloppy and arrogant. "She owns a condo in Soho," Michael reported, standing before Richard's massive mahogany desk. A dozen screens behind Richard glowed with data streams, financial charts, and surveillance feeds. Mortgage is 3 times what her declared salary could support. 2 luxury cars, both leased. Credit card debt is north of $200,000. She's been funneling money from Vivid Edge into a shell corporation registered in the Caymans. Richard stared out the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Who are the other board members at her firm? Who are their major clients? 4 other members. All minor socialites, easily influenced. Their client list is surprisingly robust for a firm of their size. It seems Ms. Reed was very good at using her association with Hayes to leverage contracts. Good, Richard said, the word cutting through the air. I want them to know what it feels like to be associated with a predator. Michael, I want you to start a quiet cascade. Contact the institutional investors in every single one of Vivid Edge's major clients. Use our back channels. Feed them anonymous, irrefutable proof of the firm's financial instability and the criminal investigation into their board member, Chloe Reed. Mention misappropriation of funds. Mention the attack on my daughter. Let the market do the work. I want Vivid Edge to be a toxic asset by morning. Consider it done, Michael said. And the personal debt, Richard continued, turning from the window. His eyes were devoid of all emotion. Buy it. Buy all of it. Her mortgage, her car leases, her credit cards. I want to own every penny she owes. I want to be the wolf at her door, holding the deed to her house. Next, they moved on to William Hayes. The picture there was more complex and infinitely more infuriating. William wasn't just a cheat, he was a fraud. The much-lauded proprietary algorithm that was the cornerstone of his company, Innovate Dynamics, was not his own. The real architect was his former college roommate and co-founder, a brilliant but unassuming programmer named Ben Carter, whom William had systematically squeezed out of the company 2 years prior with a paltry buyout and a draconian NDA. Ben Carter was now teaching computer science at a community college in Queens, while William graced the covers of tech magazines. Hayes has been cooking the books for the last 3 quarters, Michael explained, pointing to a screen filled with impossibly complex spreadsheets. He's been inflating user engagement metrics and overstating revenue projections to pump up the company's valuation ahead of a planned IPO. The investor dinner he was at the night of the attack, he was finalizing the last round of pre-IPO funding. Richard felt a grim smile touch his lips for the first time in days. It was a terrifying sight. He built a house of cards. How poetic. He looked at Michael. Find Ben Carter. Bring him to me. I want to hear his story, and I want to offer him a new job, helping me tear down everything his old friend has built. The plan began to form in Richard's mind. A grand and terrible symphony of destruction. It wouldn't be a quick, clean kill. That was not his style. He would dismantle their lives piece by piece, with the same meticulous precision he used to build his own empire. He would turn their friends into enemies, their assets into liabilities, their dreams into nightmares. There's more, Michael said, his voice hesitant for the first time. He gestured to another screen, which showed a grainy surveillance photo of William Hayes and Chloe Reed meeting a man in a parking garage. We've been tracking Hayes's movements. He's been meeting with a journalist. Richard's eyes narrowed. Who? Donnie Egan, a notorious bottom feeder, runs a sleazy online gossip rag called City Whispers, known for taking cash for stories, both to publish and to kill them. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. William and Chloe weren't just planning a future together. They were planning a narrative. They were going to control the story of the divorce. William would be the tragic victim of a mentally unstable wife, a man who found solace in the arms of another. Olivia, still grieving the loss of her child, would be painted as hysteric, her actions driving him away. The attack would be spun as a desperate plea for help from a woman Olivia had tormented. It was character assassination of the highest order. Richard's rage, which had been a cold, controlled burn, flared into a white-hot inferno. They hadn't just attacked his daughter physically. They had planned to obliterate her spirit, Her reputation, her very identity. "Michael," Richard said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Get me Donnie Egan, not on the phone. I want him in this office, now, and find out who holds the leash on his publication. Every sleazy gossip rag has an owner who prefers to remain in the shadows. I want to know who it is." He turned back to the window, watching the endless river of headlights on the streets below. They were all just pieces on a board, moving according to patterns they didn't understand. But he could see the entire board, and he was about to change the rules of the game. He wasn't just seeking revenge for his grandson. He was waging a war for his daughter's soul. Chloe Reed sat in the sterile, bone-chillingly cold interrogation room at the 19th precinct. The vibrant red of her dress, a grotesque splash of color against the drab gray walls. The designer fabric was now wrinkled, a small, dark stain marring the hem where a drop of coffee from a sympathetic-looking female officer had spilled. She'd refused the offer to change into a standard-issue jumpsuit. The dress was her armor, a final defiant remnant of the woman she had tried so desperately to become. For hours, detectives had come and gone, their questions a repetitive, monotonous drone. "Why were you at the hospital, Ms. Reed? What was your relationship with William Hayes? Did you assault Olivia Worthington Hayes?" She answered with a carefully rehearsed mixture of denial and indignation. She was there to talk, she insisted. Olivia had become hysterical, a misunderstanding blown tragically out of proportion. She was the victim, framed by a powerful family that wanted her silenced. She was a consummate performer, her voice quivering at the right moments, tears welling in her beautiful, calculating eyes on cue. But beneath the performance, a frantic, terrified bird was beating its wings against the cage of her ribs. It hadn't been supposed to go like this. The plan had been simple, brutal in its elegance. William had fed her the details for weeks. Olivia was emotionally fragile, prone to hysterics, a fact her father's overprotectiveness only exacerbated. Chloe was to go to the hospital and provoke a confrontation. Not a physical one. That was never part of the script. She was simply meant to reveal the affair, to tell Olivia that William wanted a divorce. The inevitable emotional breakdown would be witnessed by the nurses. It would be the cornerstone of their narrative. Poor, unstable Olivia, whose irrational behavior tragically led to the loss of her baby, driving her loving husband away. William would be free, his reputation intact, and Chloe would finally step out of the shadows and into the life she believed she deserved. But seeing Olivia, so serene and luminous even in a hospital bed, her hand resting on the swell of her pregnancy, had ignited a poison in Chloe's soul. It was a jealousy so profound, so corrosive, it felt like it could dissolve her from the inside out. Olivia had everything Chloe had ever craved, not just the money and the status, but the legitimacy, the effortless grace of someone born to that world. She hadn't had to fight, to scrape, to compromise every piece of herself to get there. It had all been handed to her. And the sight of that pregnant belly, the ultimate symbol of Olivia's victory, the anchor that Chloe feared would bind William to his wife forever, had made something inside her snap. The carefully constructed plan had dissolved in a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated rage. Her lawyer, a slick, overpriced shark William had sent, finally arrived. He exuded an air of weary confidence. "Chloe," he said, sitting opposite her, "this is a mess, but we can manage it. William is prepared to support your version of events. We'll paint Olivia as the aggressor. We'll leak details of her erratic behavior during the pregnancy. We can create enough doubt to get the assault charges reduced to a misdemeanor, maybe even dropped." A sliver of relief pierced through her panic. Will was standing by her. Of course he was. They were partners. "And the baby?" Chloe asked, her voice barely a whisper. She hadn't meant for that to happen. She hadn't. The lawyer's expression tightened. That's the complication. The death of the fetus elevates everything. They could try to charge you with something far more serious. But for now, the official cause is placental abruption due to maternal stress. We can work with that. He leaned forward. The most important thing is that you and William present a united front. Richard Worthington will bring his considerable resources to bear. This will be a war fought in the press as much as in the courtroom. He left her with a renewed, if fragile, sense of hope. She would weather this. She and Will would come out the other side, together. She had come too far to let it all end in a precinct interrogation room. Her life had been a series of calculated escapes. She'd escaped her dead-end town, escaped a family mired in poverty and addiction, escaped the string of deadbeat boyfriends who saw her only as an accessory. In New York, she had meticulously crafted the persona of Chloe Reed, a woman of style and substance. She worked 3 jobs, starving herself to afford the right clothes, learning about art and wine and finance from books and podcasts. She was a chameleon, adapting herself to be whatever the man she was with wanted. When she met William Hayes at a tech conference, she saw her magnum opus. He had the ambition, the looks, and most importantly, the connection to real power. He was her ticket to the stratosphere. She remade herself for him, becoming the sleek, sharp, and unapologetically ambitious woman he claimed to crave. She was his confidant, his partner in crime, the one who wasn't afraid to be ruthless. She helped him strategize the ousting of Ben Carter. She celebrated with him as he lied to investors. She believed his promises of a future together. A future that was always just around the corner, always after one more deal, one more funding round, one more step up the ladder. The marriage to Olivia, he'd explained, was a necessary evil, a strategic merger. And Chloe, blinded by her own ambition, had believed him. 2 days later, she made bail. The amount was astronomical, but a wire from an untraceable offshore account, William's doing, she assumed, had secured her release. Stepping out of the courthouse into a maelstrom of flashing cameras and shouted questions, she held her head high, the picture of defiant innocence. But as she slid into the back of a waiting town car, her phone buzzed. A news alert. Vivid edge marketing faces. Sudden collapse as clients flee amid scandal. Her blood ran cold. She frantically clicked the link. One by one, every major client had pulled their contract, citing a lack of confidence in the firm's leadership. The stock, which traded on a minor exchange, was in freefall. Another alert buzzed. Soho Towers begins foreclosure proceedings on luxury condo. Then another. Lexus Financial repossesses 2 vehicles registered to Chloe Reed. It was an avalanche, a systematic, impossibly fast demolition of her life. She tried to log into her bank accounts. They were frozen. Her credit cards were declined. She called William. The number was disconnected. She tried his private line. Disconnected. Panic, true and suffocating, began to close in. This wasn't William's plan. This was something else. This was a force beyond anything she had ever encountered. She finally reached her lawyer. "What's happening?" she shrieked into the phone. There was a pause on the other end. "Chloe," he said, his voice grim. "William Hayes just released a public statement. He's claiming you were an obsessive stalker, that he had a restraining order pending against you. He's painted you as a deranged fantasist who targeted his innocent, pregnant wife." The world tilted on its axis. The phone slipped from her numb fingers and clattered to the floor of the car. He had cut her loose. He had fed her to the wolves to save himself. And the wolf, she realized with a dawning, soul-shattering clarity, was Richard Worthington. He wasn't just coming for her. He was erasing her. The first tremor of Richard Worthington's revenge struck not with a bang, but with a whisper. a single, perfectly placed article in the Wall Street Journal's online tech section, published at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday, when the markets in Asia were waking up and New York's power brokers were checking their phones over their first espresso. The headline was innocuous, almost academic. Innovate Dynamics faces scrutiny over algorithm provenance. The article didn't mention William Hayes by name in the first 3 paragraphs. It spoke of industry-wide concerns about intellectual property theft and the pressure on startups to deliver revolutionary tech. Then, it quoted several anonymous sources, former employees, industry analysts, and a source close to the original development team, who raised serious questions about the originality of Innovate's core algorithm. It hinted at a co-founder who had been unjustly pushed out. It concluded by mentioning the company's imminent, highly anticipated IPO, framing it now not as a triumph, but as a potential house of cards. By the time the New York Stock Exchange opened, Innovate Dynamics' pre-IPO valuation was hemorrhaging. The investors William had wooed at the dinner party were now fielding frantic calls from their partners. The story was a masterpiece of corporate assassination, no overt accusations, just a cascade of expertly crafted doubt. It was respectable, undeniable, and it spread like a virus through the financial world. William Hayes woke up to a living nightmare. His phone was a ceaseless buzz of panicked texts and emails. His PR team was in meltdown. He called an emergency board meeting, striding in with a practiced air of outrage and control. "This is a baseless smear campaign," he boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the sleek, minimalist boardroom. "It's a pathetic attempt by a competitor to derail our IPO. We will issue a statement. We will sue for libel. We will crush whoever is behind this." But as he looked at the faces around the table, he saw not solidarity, but shrewd calculation. These were not his friends. They were investors. Their loyalty was to their money. They saw a risk, a potential scandal that could tank their investment. The IPO, they decided, would be put on indefinite hold, pending an internal investigation. William had lost control of his own company in the space of 3 hours. Just as he was reeling from this blow, the second tremor hit. This one was louder, dirtier, and aimed straight at the heart of his personal life. The gossip rag, City Whispers, which he and Chloe had planned to use as their own propaganda machine, suddenly posted a new banner headline: Tech CEO's Mistress attacks Billionaire's daughter, the sordid story of deceit, greed, and a dead baby. William stared at the screen, his blood turning to ice. The story was a brutal, detailed account of his affair with Chloe. It had everything: photos of them at their secret meetings, text messages, intimate and damning, details of the kickback scheme with vivid edge marketing. But it was the framing that was so devastating. It painted William not as a man who made a mistake, but as a cold, manipulative predator who had targeted the vulnerable daughter of a billionaire, used her to fund his fraudulent company, and then conspired with his mistress to dispose of her. His public statement about Chloe being a stalker was printed alongside a photo of them kissing on a yacht in St. Bart's. He was a liar, a cheat, a fraud, and now, in the court of public opinion, complicit in the death of his own son. The architect of this public crucifixion was a man named Donnie Egan, who was, at that very moment, sitting in Richard Worthington's penthouse office. Egan, a weaselly man with sweat stains on his collar, had been picked up by Michael's team and deposited in a chair opposite Richard. He had tried to bluster, to threaten, but one look into Richard's dead eyes, and his bravado had evaporated. "I want the name of your owner," Richard had said, his voice quiet. Egan had squirmed. I have an agreement." Richard had simply slid a file across the desk. It contained photos of Donnie Egan in a compromising position with an underage male prostitute. Egan turned the color of ash. He gave up the name in less than a second. The owner of the parent company of City Whispers was a rival media mogul, a man with whom Richard had a long and complicated history. A few discreet calls were made. A few old favors were called in. By noon, Richard Worthington's holding company was the majority shareholder of City Whispers. Donnie Egan now worked for him. "I want you to destroy him, Mr. Egan," Richard instructed, pushing a new file, thick with the opposition research his team had compiled, across the desk. "I want every sin, every lie, every dirty secret you can find. Use the information I've given you. I want William Hayes to be a pariah. I want people to cross the street to avoid him. I want his name to be synonymous with filth." Egan, now trembling with a mixture of fear and journalistic glee, nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, Mr. Worthington." The campaign was merciless. Stories appeared about William's callous treatment of his former partner, Ben Carter. Interviews with anonymous ex-girlfriends painted him as a serial manipulator. Financial analysts began dissecting his company's cooked books on cable news. The social pillar of his life crumbled first. Invitations to galas were rescinded. His membership at an exclusive country club was put under review. Friends stopped returning his calls. He was toxic. Meanwhile, Richard's assault on Chloe Reed continued its silent, inexorable progress. With her assets frozen and her reputation destroyed, she was rendered helpless. The law firm William had hired dropped her as a client, citing irreconcilable differences. She was forced to take a public defender. She lost her condo and was living out of a cheap motel near the airport. The press, who had initially mobbed her, now ignored her. She was old news, a forgotten pawn in a much larger game. Richard Worthington didn't want her in jail, not yet. He wanted her to suffer in the world she had so desperately tried to conquer, to be stripped of everything and left with nothing but her own choices. Richard stood at his office window, watching the city light up as dusk fell. The revenge was not satisfying. It was a cold, empty necessity. It would not bring back his grandson. It would not heal his daughter. But it was a promise kept. He had told them he would take their world. And as he watched the lights of the city twinkle, he knew, with chilling certainty, that he was far from finished. He was just getting started. Olivia floated in a gray, timeless space, suspended between the morphine haze and the sharp edges of reality. In this limbo, her son was still with her. She could feel his phantom kicks, the familiar weight of him beneath her heart. But whenever the fog began to clear, the truth would rush in, a brutal, icy wave. The silence where a heartbeat should be, the aching emptiness of her womb, the sterile white ceiling of the hospital room that had become her prison. Her father was a constant, quiet presence at her side. He never spoke of the revenge he was orchestrating. He simply sat with her, reading financial reports on his tablet or just watching her, his face an unreadable mask that couldn't quite hide the profound grief in his eyes. He managed the world outside so she wouldn't have to. He fielded the calls, barred the doors to unwanted visitors, and ensured that the only news that reached her was filtered, gentle, and bland. William had tried to see her, once. He had appeared at her door, his face tear-streaked and pleading. Richard had intercepted him in the hallway. Olivia couldn't hear the words, only the low, menacing rumble of her father's voice, and then William's choked sob. He hadn't tried again. A part of her, a small, foolish part, was disappointed. Another, much larger part, was relieved. She didn't know what she would say to him. How do you speak to the man whose betrayal cost you your child? How do you look at the face you once loved and see only the architect of your ruin? Her physical recovery was slow but steady. The scars on her arms from Chloe's nails were healing, thin white lines against her pale skin. The deeper, internal scars were another matter. Her days were a monotonous rotation of nurses, doctors, and therapists. The grief counselor, a woman with kind eyes and a soft voice, encouraged her to talk about the baby, to give him a name. "Theodore," Olivia whispered one afternoon, the name tasting strange and new on her tongue. "Teddy." She had planned to call him Teddy. Saying it aloud made it real, and the reality was an agony so sharp it stole her breath. She curled into a ball and wept, not with loud, cathartic sobs, but with a silent, wrenching despair that seemed to emanate from the very marrow of her bones. One evening, a week after the attack, her father brought in a sleek, silver laptop and set it on her rolling bedside table. "There's someone I think you should speak to," he said gently. He opened the laptop and initiated a video call. The face that appeared on the screen was ordinary, kind, and tired. A man in his late 30s with thinning hair and glasses. "Olivia," her father said, "this is Ben Carter." Olivia frowned, the name vaguely familiar. "Ben was William's co-founder at Innovate Dynamics," Richard explained. Ben Carter looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around the screen. "Mrs. Worthington Hayes," he began, his voice soft. "First, I am so sorry for your loss. What happened to you is monstrous." "Thank you, Mr. Carter," Olivia whispered. "Your father. He showed me what William did, with the company, with my algorithm." He took a deep breath. "I'm not surprised, not really. I always knew what he was capable of. The ambition. It was like a hunger in him. It devoured everything. Friendship, loyalty, truth. I just never thought—" His voice trailed off. "He used to be my best friend. We built that company in my dorm room on ramen and dreams." For the first time, Olivia saw William through someone else's eyes. She saw the boy Ben described, the charming, brilliant friend who could convince anyone of anything. And she saw the man he became, the one who could look his best friend in the eye and steal his life's work. The betrayal she felt was suddenly not hers alone. It was part of a pattern. She wasn't the first person William had broken on his climb to the top. She was just the most recent. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because your father offered me a chance to get my work back," Ben said, a flicker of strength in his eyes. "He's helping me file a lawsuit. We're going to expose everything, but I wanted you to hear it from me. I wanted you to know that the man you married, the company he built, it was all a lie. None of this is your fault. None of this is your fault." The words were a key, unlocking a cage of guilt she hadn't even realized she was trapped in. Had she been foolish? Blind? Had she ignored the signs because the fantasy was easier than the truth? Yes. But she had not deserved this. Her son had not deserved this. After the call ended, a fragile shift occurred within her. The grief was still a vast, dark ocean, but in the distance she could see the faint outline of a shore. The narrative William and Chloe had intended for her, the hysterical, unstable wife, had been their lie, not her reality. She had been betrayed, attacked, and she had survived. The next day, when the therapist came, Olivia was ready to talk. She talked about Teddy. She talked about the nursery at home, painted a pale, soft blue, waiting for an occupant who would never arrive. She talked about her marriage, finally admitting to the doubts and fears she had so long suppressed. And she talked about her future, a terrifying blank canvas. "I don't know who I am without him," she admitted, the words tasting like ash. "My whole life has been in relation to someone else, my father's daughter, then William's wife." "And now?" the therapist prompted gently. Olivia looked down at her hands, at the faint scars that would always be a reminder. "Now," she said slowly, testing the word. "I am just Olivia." That evening, she asked her father to bring her the news reports. All of them. He hesitated, his face etched with worry. "I don't think that's wise, darling." "I need to see," she insisted, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "I need to know what you're doing." Reluctantly, he handed her the tablet. She spent hours reading, her heart pounding as she absorbed the full, brutal scope of her father's revenge. The corporate demolition, the public shaming, the meticulous, cold-blooded destruction of 2 lives. It was terrible. It was violent. And as she read, a strange, complex emotion rose within her. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't joy. It was a sense of grim, terrible balance. They had taken a life. Her father, in return, was taking theirs. But it wasn't enough. It wouldn't bring Teddy back. It wouldn't heal her. It was her father's war, fought on his terms. She realized with a startling clarity that her own healing had to be something different. It couldn't be about destruction. It had to be about building something new from the wreckage. She looked at her father, who was watching her with an expression of fierce, protective love. "Daddy," she said, her voice clear and firm, "I want you to stop." Richard Worthington looked at his daughter as if she had just started speaking a foreign language. "Stop?" The word was incredulous, a crack in his granite composure. "Olivia, they're not finished. They're broken, but they're not destroyed. Hayes still has allies. Reed still has the capacity to harm. I will not stop until I am certain they can never touch you or your name again." "And when will that be?" Olivia asked, her gaze steady, challenging him for the first time in her life. "When they're in jail? Bankrupt? When they're living on the street? Will it ever be enough? It won't bring him back, Dad." The mention of her son hung in the air between them, a shared, unhealable wound. Richard's jaw tightened. "No," he conceded, his voice raspy with emotion. "It won't. But it's the only justice we have." "Is it?" she countered. "Or is it just vengeance? You're erasing them. But in doing that, you're keeping them tied to us. I don't want to spend the rest of my life defined by William Hayes and Chloe Reed and the terrible things they did. I don't want their ghosts haunting my future. I want to be free of them. Truly free. And I can't do that if you're waging this biblical war in my name." Her words, spoken with such quiet, resolute strength, struck him more deeply than any corporate attack ever could. He saw in her not the fragile princess he had always sought to protect, but a woman forged in unimaginable pain, emerging with a wisdom that humbled him. She was right. His revenge was about his own rage, his own sense of powerlessness in the face of his grandson's death. It was about control. But Olivia was seeking something else entirely. Peace. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, the question a surrender and a plea. "Let the legal system handle Chloe Reed," Olivia said. "Let Ben Carter's lawsuit handle William. Your part is done. You've exposed them. Now let's walk away. Let's focus on us. On healing." And so, the architect of ruin laid down his arms. Richard called off the relentless media attacks. He ceased the financial strangulation. He allowed the public narrative to fade, the firestorm he had created to burn itself out. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, but just as the dust began to settle, a new, unexpected twist emerged. It came from the last person anyone expected. Chloe Reed's public defender. The young, overworked lawyer had been digging, trying to find anything that could mitigate his client's sentence. And he found something. Not an excuse, but a piece of a puzzle that changed the entire picture. He discovered that Chloe Reed had a sister, a younger sister named Sarah, who had died 5 years earlier at the age of 19. The cause of death was a septic infection resulting from a botched, illegal, late-term abortion. The procedure had taken place at a back-alley clinic because Sarah couldn't afford a proper hospital and was terrified of her conservative family. The lawyer found Sarah's journals. In them, she wrote about her boyfriend, a charismatic, ambitious college student who had promised to stand by her, but who, when faced with the reality of a child, gave her $500 in cash and the address of the clinic. He told her a baby would ruin his plans, his future. The boyfriend's name was William Hayes. The revelation was a bombshell. William hadn't just betrayed Olivia. He hadn't just cheated on his best friend. He had a history of discarding lives that became inconvenient to his ambition. His actions with Chloe's sister provided a chilling context for his affair with Chloe herself. He had preyed on her ambition, yes, but he had also likely seen in her a familiar desperation, a vulnerability he knew how to exploit. Chloe's attack on Olivia, while unforgivable, was suddenly cast in a new, more tragic light. It wasn't just the act of a spurned mistress. It was a distorted, hysterical, and violent echo of a past trauma, a rage born from a grief she had never been able to process, directed at a woman who represented everything her sister had lost. When Olivia learned the news, she felt not a shred of sympathy for Chloe, but a profound and chilling understanding of the darkness that had driven her. The story was no longer a simple triangle of husband, wife, and mistress. It was a tangled, generational web of pain, ambition, and loss, with William Hayes sitting at its center like a patient, poisonous spider. This new information changed everything for the prosecution. With this evidence of a pattern of behavior, of manipulation and callous disregard for human life, the district attorney saw an opportunity. They revisited William's involvement. His initial lies to the police, his public statement slandering Chloe, his financial ties to her. It all started to look less like a man caught in an affair and more like a conspiracy. Had he intentionally sent Chloe to the hospital? Did he know how unstable she was? Could he have reasonably foreseen that her actions might lead to harm? The final devastating piece of evidence came from an unlikely source. Ben Carter, while preparing for his civil suit, was going through old company servers he'd had the foresight to back up before William forced him out. He found a series of encrypted, password-protected audio files buried deep in a hidden folder. They were recordings of William's phone calls. Richard's team of hackers decrypted them. The last recording was dated the morning of the attack. It was a conversation between William and Chloe. "She won't let go, Chloe," William's voice said, tight with frustration. "She'll use this baby to keep me tied to her and her father forever. We need to end this. You need to go there. Tell her it's over. Tell her everything. I want her to understand what she's losing. I want her to break. The doctors are already worried about her stress levels. Let nature take its course." It was the smoking gun. He hadn't explicitly told Chloe to attack Olivia, but he had loaded the weapon, aimed it, and sent a notoriously unstable woman to pull the trigger, all while knowing that the resulting maternal stress could lead to the very complication that killed his son. He hadn't just been trying to create a narrative for a divorce. He had been callously, indifferently, willing to risk his child's life to secure his freedom. The city that had been shocked by Richard Worthington's revenge was now stunned into silence by the depths of William Hayes's depravity. The pariah became a monster. The whispers became a roar of condemnation. And in a quiet hospital room, Olivia Worthington Hayes closed her eyes. Finally, truly, free. The war was over. Her healing could now begin. Olivia's journey from devastating betrayal to quiet strength is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. While Richard Worthington's revenge shook the city, true healing began only when the cycle of destruction was broken. This story reminds us that authenticity and connection are the true measures of a life well lived, and that even in the face of unimaginable loss, we can find the strength to rebuild. If this gripping tale of love, loss, and ultimate justice moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a dramatic story, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life romantic fiction novels.